Ada from Samsung, at Lady Ada King on Twitter, or you can follow at Samsung Internet on Twitter. I'm here to talk to you today about a Rube Goldberg machine and web technology. So a Rube Goldberg machine is a term probably not many people have come across before, but it's these machines which where of lots of different technology interacting together to produce an overall effect. Kind of this kind of thing. So I used to really love playing with these as a kid. So I would get every toy in my toolbox and connect them all together with tape and rope and do it so that, and marbles having going down pipes, falling on stuff, knocking stuff over, getting all my books to fall like dominoes. And it was really good fun. I'd use every single toy I'd have to make some weird, stupid mechanism. And I'd like to say, compare that to front-end development today. This talk is definitely a love letter to complexity, because front-end development today is really difficult. There's huge amounts of tools to learn, all interacting in different ways. So HTML, very declarative, and JavaScript, which is programmatic, and CSS, which is declarative but different to HTML. And we're getting more and more toys in our web toy box every day to play with. So the main goal of this talk is to show you how certain web technologies go together. So in particular, CSS Grid, web animations, web components, and CSS Custom Properties. So each of these topics is a super deep topic in its own right. I could probably give a 2-hour talk off the top of my head for any of these topics, but I won't because I have half an hour. So I'm going to assume a small amount of prior knowledge. I'll try and explain what each one is, but I'm not going to go into the details of the API. But each one is super, super cool, and if you're not already familiar with them, I recommend checking them out on MDN because they're really good. Of course, you're already all experts on CSS Grid, so that's one ticked off. Well, you were if you stayed for Joe's amazing talk. Yeah, but so independently, yeah, they're really incredible, really powerful, but used together, it starts to feel like you have superpowers of web development, and it's a fantastic experience. So I'm going to begin with CSS Grid because it's the one where hopefully you're going to be more familiar with it. So CSS Grid is a really, really powerful layout framework that's built into the browser. You don't really need anything additional to use it. You can just use it out the box, and it's really powerful. I mean, if nothing else, you save 250 kilobytes of importing a layout library like Bootstrap. It allows you to do really, really neat stuff, like have intentional white space in your website, so that not all the content gets clustered up as close together as possible. So it's really good for making really beautiful typographic websites. So you can do stuff where everything is laid out like it would be in a magazine. So you can work from layout in. That wasn't what I wanted to show you. I'll just carry on talking anyway. So yeah, you can work from layout in to really lay out stuff nicely in your page. The other cool thing it allows you to do is, because you're laying stuff out in the CSS rather than using markup for layout, it allows you to get rid of a bunch of mess. So your pages, more of the elements on your page are syntactically correct, are semantic, and actually mean something to the document. And the cool thing about Grid is that, as I said a moment ago, when designing with Grid, you build from the layout in. You design your page and you fit content into it. And then you can use it alongside Flexbox, which works the other way around, and spaces your content in relation to its neighbor content. And it's really powerful and really cool. Right, next topic I'm going to touch on. So web animations. So this one I'm more going to show you the API shape for this, because it's a pretty neat one. So web animations is a JavaScript API for animating elements. It's pretty neat looking. So you can go element.animate. You give it some keyframes. I'll explain what they are in a sec. And you give it some options, such as the easing, the duration, all the other properties you're probably accustomed to if you've been doing animation through CSS. I'm going to shrink that. That's too big. Here are the keyframes at the top. So I've got it going, so it's an array of properties, which actually I'm going to zoom that out because you can't see all that. So yeah, here's two examples which are the same. So the first one has an array of properties. So animate from transform translate y0 to translate y 80 vertical height units up. Or you could go for like animate the transform from this to that. So those two mean the exact same thing and have a fun effect. So animation. The properties object is super powerful and allows you some really interesting stuff. So I can make it animate twice. I can make it go back and forth in each direction. And I can set the easing. So the ease out keyword here is just a built-in easing function that's built into the web browser. It's just a keyword, just like you would use in CSS animations. So simple animation. And it's pretty nice. And of course, you don't have to define those each time. So you can just reference these objects to use them again and again. So if you have lots of stuff that transforms in the same way, you just define it at the top and reference it as a variable, like you would, like it's just a normal object. The nice thing about it, though, is that it also provides some functionality for hooking into like asynchronous code. So it provides the .finished promise as a property on your animation, which if you use it with async functions or generators, you can then yield or await on that property. So here I've got it. When I call my, when I run this code, it will animate the first line, and then it will wait for the promised, for the .finished promise to resolve before it runs the next line, and then all of that then returns me a promise. Has anyone here used like async functions in JavaScript before? Okay, one hand or a few hands. Like I've taught you something really cool here. Check these out. Asynchronous functions are super awesome if you're dealing with promises, because they allow you to, well, await promises. Great for building asynchronous code that looks synchronous when you write it. Very cool way to work. Yeah, I enjoy them. They're fun. So yeah. I'm skipping slides. Right. Web components. I have no idea what I wrote for those, so I'm just going to wing it. So web components allow you to define your own HTML elements, because as developers, we know better than spec authors. Oh, that was a joke. Never mind. This is really, really super awesome, because it allows you to put the power of JavaScript into HTML. You can have some really gnarly JavaScript that does something amazing, but then you abstract it to a HTML element, and anyone can use it by just dropping the HTML element into their page, which is a really nice way to integrate some advanced functionality into any website, regardless of the framework or stack it's built upon, because it's just HTML. It gives us some cool abilities. So, for example, one of which is the shadow DOM. The shadow DOM is like a special part of the HTML that's hidden away from the cascade. You can have your own style sheets in there, which control the look of the element, and you can have lots of, you can fill it with all the horrible divs and spans and all the other gross stuff we build websites with nowadays, which is really, really nice, because then the HTML you write looks really beautiful and neat because it's full of like my special element or magic pony button or something. Oh yeah, every custom element has to have a dash in the name. So it usually ends up being like adjective noun, like beautiful button, special widget, or namespaces if you want to be boring. So yeah, Shadow DOM is really cool because it hides away all our nasty, horrible cruft. Scoped CSS is super nice because we can, everything we define in our style sheets and style sheets included by link tags in our custom elements, they can't affect the rest of the page. So we can have some custom element with some really broad selectors in there, like every div should have a background color blue, or every span should have font family Comic Sans. And this won't affect the rest of the document. So it's all isolated and kept safe, and that's just a really nice property, which is super handy. There is one exception, which I'm going to get to later, and it's actually a really cool exception, so it's pretty awesome. You also get callbacks into the lifecycle of the HTML element. This gives you the ability to listen for when the element has been dropped into a web page, or for when it's been removed, or when its attributes get changed, allowing you to react to stuff which will update it on the fly. So even if you've got some gnarly web library which is doing some funky stuff, because you can just hook in to the HTML events, you can take advantage of them all and behave as you would expect if it was a normal HTML element, and even do some extra special magic if you want. But the nice thing, my favorite thing about it is this property of hiding away all the inner elements. So it turns our websites from messes of elements which are just designed for appearance, and so like spans which just insert some space, or anything which isn't semantically part of the page gets hidden away. So we end up totally getting rid of our div soup. Cool. Next properties. Oh yeah, they're also pretty well supported. Custom elements are pretty well supported. Not quite as good as CSS Grid, but there is a polyfill for them. And there's also a polyfill for the Web Animation API, which is also pretty well supported. CSS Custom Properties are also really well supported nowadays. Has anyone actually used CSS Custom Properties before? Wow, this is okay. I'm about to show you something which is super awesome if you like CSS. So CSS Custom Properties, they're kind of like variables, but like better. So like a variable, you can take some value and assign it to a property, and then you can use it later. So this is all very nice for example, just defining like every like the general size for a padding on my page, like dash padding, should be 10 pixels, or color cyan in my slide deck should be, well, that color in the top right corner. Color cyan dash dark is that color in the bottom left corner. It's pretty nice. It's really cool. The the root selector just means like the document. It's like the highest, it's like the topmost selector you can get to. So in this case, it will affect the rest of the document. And then you can also use it in calculations. So who here has used calc in CSS before? A few more hands. Yeah, calc is really cool. It was one of those things which I put off using for ages because like, oh yeah, no one supports it. It's supported everywhere these days. It's super awesome. I really like it, and it works really well with CSS variables. So in this case, that makes no sense. What did I write there? The background is padding is 5 pixels times 5. Yeah, the background is 25 pixels. That should be a padding, not a background. I'm really sorry. That's really stupid. I'll change that later. So I should have proofread these. So I get for writing my slides yesterday. No, I'm kidding. I didn't write them yesterday. All of them anyway. So yeah, it's nonsense. Nonsense. And I thought, no, I've got another example. I did it again here. What am I was really jet lagged. That's my excuse. No one can say otherwise. So here, just pretend that says margin or something instead of background at the bottom, or padding, or whatever takes a length property. So I've got, so what am I doing here? So I've defined my padding should be 5 pixels, but because it, oh yeah, my point was that CSS properties are super, super powerful because they are empowered by the cascade, like the part of CSS that makes CSS absolutely amazing and wonderful. And I will fight you if you disagree. CSS is amazing and wonderful. I defined it as 5 pixels in the root, but in main, I'm overriding it to be 3 pixels. So if I have a P inside the main, padding is going to be treated as 3 pixels. If I have a P outside of the main element, then it's going to be 5 pixels, which is super cool and really neat and super fun. But the really, really fun thing is that it works beautifully with web components. So I said earlier that nothing can like get in, like the style sheet of a web component is totally isolated from the rest of the document. This document style sheet doesn't go in, almost, and it doesn't get out. Well, custom properties do. Like custom properties pierce the style sheet. So you can define properties on your document and have them affect styles of your custom elements, which is super handy and really nice. This is just illustrative. Like it wouldn't, the HTML wouldn't look like this. It's just like to show you that that style is in the shadow DOM of that custom element. So that's pretty fun. But it does give you, but because it flows down the cascade, you can set your own variable. So in this case, my dash var is 5 pixels, but in the custom element, my dash var is 10 pixels. And that's pretty cool, but you might be like, hey, what's the point? You've just defined it twice, and you're ignoring one of them. But what it does mean, which isn't true, I am ignoring one of them. You can use selectors to override it. So here I've done like a selector on the element, my var is 20 pixels. So this overrides the my dash var on the host element, which is the actual element itself, and it allows me to set the margin on the element without having to change the code inside my, my custom element. So it allows me to have bits of my custom element customizable from the document using CSS. And here I've done it in the style sheet. Sorry, I've done it on the actual element itself. But you can also just do it in the style sheet. So here, custom-element has my var set to 20 pixels. So for example, in my pages where I've got the fancy headers, I've made a custom element to do fancy text that looks pretty. And the ability to customize the vertical and horizontal alignment can be done using custom CSS properties, which is super fun and really awesome. I keep saying that phrase again and again. I need to find like another thing for I really like this a lot. It's a cool behavior. It's really good. It's just like a really neat solution that's just really beautiful. Yeah, just that combination just makes me feel good. All right, grid and web components. So this is actually a pretty simple one. So we've got our old style of HTML, like some big-ass document we wrote, full of layout elements and display elements and all kinds of stuff. Well, if we're using CSS Grid, it allows us to get rid of the layout elements. We use web components, and we encapsulate all our display elements into the web components, into their shadow DOM. And we get this really nice HTML that's super semantic, and it looks really good. Like, make that big so you can see it, because I really like it. Hey, responsive design kicked in. That was really cool. So that was actually a thing so I keep being surprised by stuff like that, which like worked because I'm talking about it, but it's because I wrote this slide deck based on all these principles. So this whole slide deck is written with web components and custom CSS properties and CSS Grid and web animations. So if you look through the source code of this deck, like it's all super semantic. It's like I have a grid slide element, and I have a grid notes element for putting my notes in. I've got my fancy text element for doing fancy headers. It looks like what it is, which is really nice, because then if something breaks, I know I wrote what I intended in the HTML, so therefore the bug must lie in one of the web components I've written. So, and that's, I think, is the beauty of the semantic web. Like, I write what I intend to write, so therefore any bugs lie in the individual code of my web components. And when you start writing HTML that looks like this, you just end up with all these superpowers of, like, I just wrote something that should work, and then it works first time, because I've made, like, because all my web components have been debugged from when they've broken the previous times. So it means I can create a new slide full of HTML in 4 seconds, because I just type in what I think the HTML should look like. Which was actually my final point of the thing, but I get overexcited. I really love HTML. Like, declarative languages are just, oh, so good. So yeah, CSS Grid and custom properties. It's actually this is just a one-slide one. So my whole plot was I would find one thing to combine like everything together. I almost did it, but so CSS Grid and custom properties is really, really nice for responsive design. So the cool thing about custom properties is that they allow you to put names to something instead of having just the raw value. And CSS Grid can be quite a complex API to type out without knowing what each individual property in CSS Grid means. So what it means is that you can write out your layout based upon stuff. So for example, this has the grid columns amount of 1 fraction unit of rows. So instead of having my actual grid template itself in the queries, in the media selector, there, I've forgotten what that term is, for the thing in the middle. Media query, thank you so much. Yeah, names are hard. Yeah, so in the media query, I can have, I only have to change the actual CSS variables themselves, which makes it super clear what's happening. Like, I'm changing the padding to 20 pixels, so I'm making it bigger and more spaced apart, but I'm decreasing the number of grid columns to 1, which makes much more sense than overriding the grid template columns on every single instance of my grid we have, which I think is just, it's really nice. It makes a lot of sense. It's a cool way to work. Again, that's why my type change sizing got smaller when I made this really big. That's a bad example because that one doesn't do it. I'm on my last slide. How am I doing for time? Did I just like rush through all that really quickly? Oh no, I'm doing pretty good. So this is the first time I've actually run through this talk all in one go. So I'm pretty glad that came out on time. So custom properties and web animations. This is kind of like the slide I've been leading up to because it's the bit that I think is the coolest stuff ever. So one thing I really, really like to do is define all of my easings for animations in my CSS, because like easings are part of your style. They're not part of any programmatic element. They're a style property. So I define them all in my style sheet, which makes it really nice because then I can use them for any transition or CSS animation in my style sheet, which is pretty cool. But you can also access them from JavaScript. So at the top, I'm getting my computer styles for the document element. So that's where the :root properties are defined. And I'm using it in my easing value in my animation API. So that's pretty cool. I like that. OK, so how about another example where you're taking the power of CSS and bringing it into JavaScript? So here I've got my duration factor, dur factor CSS property. And I've given an option to the user to slow down animations. But what I'm also doing here, I'm listening to the reduced motion media query. And if the user has that set, then I set the duration to 0. So all animations happen in 0 time, and there's no like transitions on anything, which has a really nice effect. So I'm doing duration is 500 times like the get the property value of dur factor. Like one thing I do personally, like get computed style document.element get property value is really long, so I normally just put that into a little helper function of like get property, and which just gets it all for me and makes all this code look a lot neater. But I don't want to introduce stuff like that here. So yeah, that's really nice. It gives you so if the user turns on the media query and you run this script again, it's going to do the animation instantly, but then you can still hook into it to trigger all of your other stuff. So if you've got something waiting for this animation to finish, it will get triggered straight away at 0 time, instead of waiting like an arbitrary 2 seconds for an animation which isn't actually playing to finish. So it's this really nice combination of having animations you can react to them finishing, and you can have, but still respond to the user preferences from CSS. Really nice. I just think that's pretty fantastic. Now this would be nice, wouldn't it, if you could just animate CSS properties directly. Like, I really wish we could do that today, but we can't in most browsers. But it is a thing that's intended in Houdini. It's part of the typed OM spec. It's like landed in Chrome 66, and it's intended to land in other places, but I'm not sure like how far it's got yet. it's really nice and really cool, but to do it, the browser has to know, like, what is X coordinate. So it can actually tween it intelligently. So you have to tell the browser that X coordinate has length syntax and its initial value is 0. So just so that it knows what to do for when it's tweening it. But yeah, I think that's my last thing. Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.